coined the term muckraker? President Theodore Roosevelt coined that term for investigative journalists. So muckrakers essentially are investigative journalists that are combing through, raking through the dirt in society to expose some kind of corruption. There are lots of famous examples of this over the years. In the early 20th century, late 19th century, some of the most famous names we would know as muckrakers would be Upton Sinclair, who wrote the famous book The Jungle about the meatpacking industry in Chicago, and Jacob Riis, who took photographs of tenement living in New York City. So essentially, a muckraker can be a journalist, they can be a photographer, but they are going to expose some kind of corruption in society, some kind of evil, some kind of problem. These are going to be, as you see here on the screen, very detailed and accurate journalistic accounts of political and economic corruption or social hardships caused by the power of big business in the United States. So you can see here in the background, we've got a picture of that rake going through the muck, exposing that corruption. We've got over here on the right, President Roosevelt combing through the muck himself, raking through the meat scandal, identifying what was brought to light by Upton Sinclair. So when it comes to Jacob Riis, his photographs, especially using the new invention of flash photography, were incredibly influential in New York City in the early 20th century. You can see the stats here on the screen. More than 80,000 tenements had been built. 2.3 million people, or 2/3 of the population in New York City, were living in tenements. These were basically slums. They were filthy. They didn't have indoor bathrooms. They didn't have areas for children to play. And they were dark and damp. And Jacob Riis would go in there oftentimes at night, and he would take pictures, unauthorized typically, using his flash photography to expose to people what these conditions were like. And he would give this presentation to the well-to-do citizens in New York City called How the Other Half Lives and Dies in New York City. And it shocked the people what they saw. Pictures such as this and this. Multiple people living in the same small, crowded room. Or this, one of his most famous photographs. I think there's at least 6 people there crowded into this corner of the room trying to get some sleep. I mean, this is how the poor and the lower middle class were living in New York City at the turn of the century. Horrifying images, shocked people, caused reform when it came to living conditions in New York City, caused reform to schools in New York City to make sure there were playgrounds where kids could exercise and play, because at home, oftentimes they were living in places like this where they just couldn't do so. Pictures such as this. And another very famous muckraker, Ida Tarbell. Ida Tarbell wrote The History of the Standard Oil Company, which was a series of articles that were published in McClure's magazine, which exposed the corruption of John Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, and was one of the reasons why Standard Oil was eventually broken up. The monopoly was broken up by the United States government. So in very basic terms, that's what muckraking is. Hopefully that helped you out. All these people, Jacob Riis, Upton Sinclair, Ida Tarbell, they are very much worth your time in researching. If you're interested, I would highly suggest checking out their lives and work. Incredibly influential citizens here in the United States. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time here on Mr. Drosty History.